Our focus today is going to be on business models, and what I'm going to do is start by introducing the topic in a few minutes, and then return it over to Howard and Andre, who are two great business model innovators who can tell us about some of the developments in the area. So just as we have a blueprint for a building that helps us structure and plan the construction effort, the business model is a structured model that describes how a venture will create and deliver value to its customers and how it will extract some of that value for itself. In a construction project, we try to stick to the plan with minor corrections along the way. In contrast, in new venture development, we keep iterating and experimenting with our business model, so we really have a highly dynamic blueprint. The business model gives us some structure and discipline to guide us through this dynamic process so that the venture will not come unglued. When we think about structuring a business model, I believe that the most important rule, really, it's the rule for structuring anything, is that you need to break what you're looking at to no more than 3 components. And of course, under each of the components, you may have some substructure. But you really need to start with no more than 3. If you have more than 3 components, you don't have a structure, you have a mess, and you need to rethink what you're doing. In the case of business models, let's see what are the three components that we're talking about. The first component is the 3 components are the value creation model, the profit model, and the logic of the business. And the first component is the value creation model, which describes how the venture creates and delivers value to its customers. And that includes the product, the target customers, the value proposition, where the venture is positioned within the value chain, and distribution, since the product typically needs to be delivered as well. Once we have created some value, we can extract some of it for the venture itself, and that's described by the profit model that starts from a revenue model that shows how we extract revenue given the value that we've created, and what is the cost structure of the venture, where we then focus on the drivers of profitability for the venture. The third component of a business model is what I call the logic of the business. The logic of the business is a structured explanation that shows why the venture is going to work. How can we actually create value and extract some of it for ourselves? And typically, we want to structure it as a flywheel that shows how the venture grows and becomes increasingly more profitable. And what I'm going to do next is kind of turn to Howard. And Howard, can you please tell us how you evaluate a business model as a venture capitalist?
Sure. Every day I see 5 or 6 different presentations of entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses. And there are things that I think are not interesting, and there's things that I think that are interesting in the business model. So first I'd like to talk about the things that are not interesting. The venture investor's job is, in the end, to make money as a result of the business that they invest in being worth a lot of money. So one of the things that is not interesting to me in a business model is a company that's simply going to take a lot of money to figure out if they are viable, profitable, and able to grow. And that's simply, if it takes a lot of money and you only make a certain amount, it's not a great investment. But if it takes a small amount of money, then it can be a great investment. Another thing that's not interesting to me is many participants in the business model. That means a company has to rely on all sorts of outside vendors or partners or companies or technology integrators. Complexity is a horrible piece to a business model. There are some companies who have figured out over time how a very complex business model can work for them, but in general, it's something that's very concerning. If you think about Google, it actually has a very, very simple business model, which is making money off of clicks for advertising. All the other things they do, I think, are subparts of their business model, but that's when it gets too complex, it gets too risky. Similarly, a business model that has many participants in the market is not a great idea because it means it's crowded and you have to fight and you have to differentiate yourself in a very complicated market with many players, which drives up your costs of customer acquisition and penetrating the market. Business models that require a lot of integration with legacy systems tend to be very slow. A potential customer may want to purchase the product, but it just takes a lot of time and money to make the decision to do it and actually implement it. So it's something that slows down the business and is harmful to a business model. Businesses that are hit-driven are not interesting. Good example are gaming companies. You can have some very exciting games, but if your next one is not a hit, your business can drop in value and your business model can dry up and go away as your customers go to another competitor. Long sales cycles similarly cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to figure out if your customers are going to buy from you. And meanwhile, before you're profitable, you're burning a lot of money to get there. So it's not a great business model. And finally, business models, in the end, you're building a business to make a lot of money. And if your goal is to sell the company or go public, you need to consider whether the market values your business model or not. And a good example is a high-margin technology business with a lot of customers that are cheap to acquire can be worth a lot of money, but a service provider model where you're doing consulting work is not valued a lot by the market, so it's not as attractive a business. On the interesting side, most of these are just the counterpart of what I said and what aren't interesting. So capital efficient means you can figure out if the business is going to have a strong business model or not without having to spend too much money to figure that out. Something that is quick. We all only have so much time in our lives. We don't want to spend 5 or 10 years to figure out if a business model is valuable or not. We'd like to do it in 2 or 3 or 4 years. Complexity is bad, so simple is good. If you can easily understand the business model and describe it to someone, you have a great advantage over complexity in the model. Being able to decide on your business model and do things independently without having to worry about what other companies are doing or that they are helping you out in your process makes it for a much more interesting business model. Again, for customers, easy to understand the model and adopt it. Businesses that have high margin, which means you make a lot of money in the process. And finally, I'm very attracted to business models that the lifetime value divided by the customer acquisition cost is a compelling ratio, and you get there very quickly. So you don't have to invest a lot of money and take a long time to get that money back.
Hey, Howard, how did Skype fit into that framework?
Well, Skype was an interesting business because it upset an expensive and slow industry, the telcos, who had huge infrastructure costs, and it was impossible for them to react. I recall the CEO of AT&T publicly stating a few months after Skype had launched that consumers are not willing to talk into their computers, and software is not a business model. And I think he was proven wrong. They provided, in their business model, it was providing a software solution to a traditional hardware model, which was a very inexpensive and fast thing to do. Their customer acquisition cost was very low, and the cost, because it was a peer-to-peer model, was zero. It cost them nothing to operate the network, so they could give it away. And as you can imagine, a traditional telco could do nothing about this because it cost them a lot of money to run their network, and so they have to charge people for it. Skype's model was interesting in that because it was free and they could give it away, they decided to make money only on things that cost them some money to do it. And finally, customer acquisition cost. When I say it was 0.001 of a dollar, that was what we estimated the cost of bandwidth and a download at the time. This was a viral model, not in people recommended to their friends, but people said to their friends, this is how I'm communicating now, and if you ever want to talk to me again, you will download this software. So it had a very inexpensive customer acquisition model. In addition, the network effects that were applied to this, the more consumers who used the business, the more valuable the network became, and therefore it became impossible for competitors to break in. Even Google tried and spent a lot of money, but they were too late.
Howard, what types of business models do you like these days?
Well, first, I just wanted to give a little bit more Skype data, just real quickly, to give a sense for how the data fits into the business model we just described. They built and launched their business on less than $500,000, which means they were able to build, launch, and get data in the market on a very low amount of money. And then they raised money while they were already growing, and they had some market traction. Their revenue growth was very quick. When they turned on revenue acquisition, which was in selling connection to the phone networks, their revenue model grew very fast, from $5 million to $50 million to $150 million. They didn't require any outside assistance. They didn't require Facebook. They didn't require any partners. They did everything on their own, so they kind of wrote their own destiny. And finally, they had a very interesting market launch model, which was the founders of Skype had founded Kazaa, which was the world's largest and most downloaded peer-to-peer music sharing platform. And they were, the founders of the company were sort of heroes in killing the, going after the Recording Industry Association, which was charging for music. And their business model was to launch Skype and become the bad boys of the Internet. Now they were going after the telcos. And that was their plan, and they promised me that within a few months of launch, they would be on the covers of magazines and newspapers as the bad boys of the net. And so I'm going to show you here a copy of, this is a copy of Fortune magazine just a few months after they left, after they launched the product, showing that they were the pirates of the net. They bloodied the music business with Kazaa, and now they're going after the $300 billion phone business. These guys are not pirates. This was all marketing for them. This was a plan in order to acquire consumers, and they did a great job.
Okay, great. So do you find any business models these days that are as attractive as Skype?
There's, other than additional peer-to-peer models that I'm seeing, one area that's quite interesting is 3D printing that I've seen kind of growing lately, because it's causing self-made manufacturing at a unit level that I think large manufacturers don't know how to react to. And there's going to be all sorts of interesting problems around who owns the content for how a product is designed, because the manufacturing where the value used to be added is now being removed from the equation. Another area that I find extremely interesting is the sharing economy, getting so popular it's even making the cover of The Economist lately. And a big reason that I invested, other than the people and the business model, the sharing economy is providing a new business model using existing assets, and so I would like to let Andre go from here.
Great. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Professor Mendelson, for inviting us here. I like to think about ourselves as the pirates of the car rental and mobility industries, so let me talk to you a little bit about relay rides. First of all, let's start with our vision. We really want to build the world's largest car sharing and car rental peer-to-peer marketplace. And our ambitions are to build a marketplace with a huge network of cars that provides comprehensive geographic coverage with unique selection of vehicles, everything from the smart car to the large truck. We want to offer amazing value for renters, so cheaper prices than what you can find in traditional car rental or car sharing, and enable owners to really monetize an asset which, as you all know, is a costly asset to own and operate, and one that depreciates over time. So we want to give owners the possibility to actually start making money with their vehicles. And finally, it's a marketplace that connects people, so we want to make sure that we have a safe and trustworthy environment for those people to connect. We disrupt many industries. I want to talk about three here that are part of our scope. First one is traditional car sharing. Traditional car sharing is the industry that has been made very popular by Zipcar in the U.S. It's a $1 billion industry, and what traditional car sharing does is they acquire the cars, they manage the fleet, they maintain the fleet, and they provide the rental service. And that's $1 billion industry. And by connecting people directly, neighbors in cities directly, we enable popular formats like hourly rentals, which really was the hallmark of the traditional car sharing industry. And that's a first market that we disrupt and we want to be pirates in. The second market, which is 30 times larger, which is the car rental industry, that's a $30 billion in the U.S. market, $60 billion worldwide. Obviously, much bigger market, much more established, but very, very much the same principle, where a large corporation acquires a lot of cars. Enterprise buys a couple million cars every year. Avis, Hertz buy a million cars every year, and they maintain a fleet of in excess of 500,000 cars in the U.S. alone. And what these guys offer is, again, traditional car rental. And we want to disrupt that industry as well by connecting people who have the car with people who need the car to get that rental directly without the intervention of a large infrastructure provider. And then finally, our most ambitious, I would say, vision over time is to disrupt the U.S. car ownership market, which is a $1.3 trillion market. We believe that by getting tens of thousands of people to share their car, we can find ourselves in situations 5 years from now where in some of the largest cities in the U.S. and the world, there could be so many cars that are available for rent from people around you, maybe even in your own neighborhood, maybe on your street, maybe even in your condo, that instead of thinking of buying a car or buying a second car, you might just as well use that shared vehicle that is available to you in such a convenient way. And that's probably one of the largest, if not the largest industry. It's the mobility industry. It's a $1.3 trillion industry in the U.S. alone. And we believe that we are, as we were talking about earlier, business models can work. It's always a timing issue. You can be either a bit too late or too early, and we think we're at the right time. And one of the reasons why we believe we're at the right time is we're seeing real societal changes when it comes to how people are thinking about cars. And the millennial generation is really thinking quite differently about cars, and that's one of the reasons why our model is actually very attractive to some of the car manufacturers, and that's one of the reasons why we have an interesting partnership with General Motors. Almost all car manufacturers will tell you that they're really concerned about how the younger generation is no longer buying cars and is starting to think about cars as a commodity rather than as an aspiration. In fact, people are getting their driver's licenses much later in life now than they used to 20 years ago. They socialize mostly through cell phones, technology, IM, social media, social networking, and the sort of mythical nature of the car and what it used to stand for in society, for the previous generations is sort of going away. And we can help accelerate that trend by making it super convenient for people just to share cars when they need them, so access instead of ownership. And we're part of, this sharing economy that was alluded to. I'm sure you're familiar with many other companies that are really revolutionizing other large aspects of the economy by connecting people through platforms. I'm sure you've heard of some of the brands that we have here, Airbnb, TaskRabbit, Rent the Runway. There are literally tens and hundreds of companies that are disrupting everything from boat sharing to bicycle sharing to mobility sharing, ride sharing, to fashion with Rent the Runway. Airbnb is all about accommodation and travel. And, we believe that software and the ability that software has in connecting people is going to disrupt a lot of those established industries because our business model is effectively much more, efficient and low cost to operate than building the infrastructure that supports all these verticals. So as Haim talked about, there's three elements in the business model. My presentation is going to focus mostly on the first element, which is the value creation for the consumer or the audience. And that's what we call in our language sort of the value proposition. So let me explain to you a little bit the value proposition for car owners. And by the way, after the end of this presentation, I know there's 2,000 people listening. You should go out and rent your cars and list them immediately on Reader Rides because you can get the benefits of this value proposition. So as you can see in this presentation here on this slide, people are doing it because it just makes sense, economically. An average car on relay rides is 4 to 5 years old. The average owner rents it out 7 to 8 days a month and makes around $250 a month, which is actually the cost of maintaining that car. So that's the first time, I think, in history where you can own a car, use it the vast majority of the time, 2/3 of the time, 3/4 of the time, and find a way to make the car not cost you anything. That's a very powerful value proposition. And that's for the average owner. What we're finding is that some of the owners are very entrepreneurial and are becoming micro fleet managers. So they're renting their car at almost all the time, or acquiring a second or third car. And some of these owners are making thousands of dollars a month. And in fact, I just showed here in this presentation 3 of our owners last year that made more with relay rides, or enough with relay rides to actually cover the Kelley Blue Book value of their vehicle or more. And they're buying their second and third because they're realizing it's a little profit that they can do, and they're quitting their jobs and doing it, which is a lot of fun. That's one of the things that's so rewarding in the peer-to-peer economy is you're not just selling a service or a product to a consumer that's buying, you're also empowering people to make money and to do things that they couldn't do before. Now, on the renter side, the value proposition is very much the traditional value prop that you expect from a marketplace like eBay, for example, where I spent 10 years, and eBay has built its business really based on the next 3 elements. First one is really value. You can get stuff on relay rides, you can get stuff on eBay, you can get stuff on Airbnb, etc., at a fraction of the cost where that you'd spend on other places, traditional places. So the cost of a daily rental on relay rides is between 20 and 40% cheaper than competition. And when you're building a business that has an inherent value advantage, you're onto something big because people want to spend less money if they can. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we're so excited and optimistic about the futures of this business. The second element of the renter value proposition is unique selection. This is just to show you some of the diversity of cars and vehicles that's available in the marketplace. And when you think about the traditional model of car rental or car sharing, with the big corporations buying, lots of cars to service the rental, these corporations are trying to get economies of scale in their purchasing. So they try to buy from one manufacturer or two. They try to buy one model or a few models in each, just a couple of models in each category, and they try to buy lots of them so that they can get the lowest possible purchase price. And as a result, the car fleet in these traditional car rental companies is kind of boring. It's mostly, cars that, you wouldn't necessarily want to buy for yourself. Whereas in our marketplace, you've got everything and anything, and these are our owners' cars. So you've got everything from, hybrid cars, electric cars, sports cars, et cetera, which is even a 1965 Ford Econoline, which is fun, fun to own these cars for the weekend and go on a trip somewhere. And finally, and I alluded to this earlier, we are really building a network that we think can really trump the geographic penetration of any other network that is providing car rental. So we're not only going to be in places where there's people, we're going to be in places where there's people, activity, and less people and less activity. We have now cars across all 50 states, only 12 months after our launch, which is a remarkable accomplishment. This slide is a bit old, so our last 2 states were North Dakota and Montana, and we have now cars in both of these 2 states and transactions too. And we have customers across 1,200 cities. And we believe that by the end of 2015, we'll have a car within a 10-minute walking distance to 100 million Americans, which will be the most dense geographic network for any car rental company. And we, of course, believe that will provide convenience to renters. So value, selection, and convenience, this is sort of the triumvirate of the value prop for our renters.
Great. Thank you very much, Andre. Howard, when you first saw the pitch for relay rides, what did you think about its business model?
The things that I thought were interesting and the things I thought were challenging, I'll outline both of them. So on the interesting side, if this works, when this works, it can generate a lot of money. And that is the most important thing in any business model, is revenue and profit. And like Skype, where I described that it was upsetting some incumbents with a new model, Relay Rides is doing the same thing. As Andre commented about, people don't use their cars very much. In fact, in the U.S., it's roughly 8%. You use your own car roughly 8% of the time, which means 92% of the time you have a depreciating asset sitting on the street doing nothing. And when you compare Relay Ride's business model to Avis's business model or Enterprise's business model, they have, or Zipcar's for that matter, they have to acquire vehicles, they have to manage them, they have to cover parking, they have to cover all of the expenses related to it, and they have to rent their car roughly 50 or 60% of the time just to break even on a per car basis. So those companies have to be very careful how they expand, because it costs them a lot of money, and if they make a mistake in expansion, they lose a lot of money. And the most interesting part of Relay Ride's business model to me is that the most expensive part, the inventory, is being borne by our consumers in the network. They are providing an asset that they are underutilizing, and we are helping them take advantage of that and making a small cut as part of the process. In terms of what are challenging about this business model, I did comment that one thing that's not so interesting is having to rely on other parties in the process, and one of the areas in this business model where we must work with other parties is in insurance. This business requires, due to our wonderful American legal system, that we are very careful about what types of coverage and protection we provide for the drivers, for the owners, and for the vehicles. And so we have done a wonderful job, Andre and his team has done a wonderful job in partnering with some large insurance companies and doing some own things in terms of trust and safety and screening drivers to make sure that they are good drivers, all the things that are necessary to make this work. At the point of investing in the company, I think that was still a big unknown. I think it has now been solved. They've done a great job and we understand it, but it was one of those areas which was relying on another significant party. If we had not been able to acquire appropriate insurance, this business would not have been able to move forward. So in this case they did, and it is moving forward, and we're very happy with that, but that was a risk in the business model.
Great, thank you very much. Another partnership that took place last year is the partnership with GM, where you integrated OnStar to your own platform. Andre, can you tell us a little bit about the role of that partnership in the development of the business model?
We love connecting people and getting them as efficiently and as easily as possible to rent their car to other people. And one of the issues that we sometimes need to deal with is people are willing to rent their vehicles. They love the fact that there's renters, neighbors around them they want to get their vehicles to. But sometimes they might be traveling, they might be at the office when the car is at home, or the car might be at the office and they may be at home. And there's these issues that prevent people from being able to fulfill, we call it fulfilling the transaction. So exchanging the keys and making sure that the renter can get into the vehicle. So the team had been thinking about how can we use technology to make this easier and to use the marketplace and platform to connect people, and also use more technology to be able to fulfill the reservation without having to have the owner meet the renter in person and exchange the keys. And that's where OnStar really plays an important role. As you probably know, OnStar has been building automotive platform technologies for the last 20 years. And one of the things we discovered as we started talking to them is they had tens of millions of vehicles that are equipped with OnStar around the country. And all of these vehicles can be, through the addition of some software and through some smart integration of our own application with their operating system, we can actually turn all of these OnStar vehicles into rental vehicles, because you can actually control them with the web. And so this is I think the very first, and I would say the most ambitious experiment of really turning a car into an internet device. A true internet device that is connected to the web and also controlled by the web. This is not about putting Pandora in your car or putting Facebook on your car. It's really about having somebody from outside the car be able to control the vehicle as if it was an internet device. And so we love the idea of innovating and experimenting with OnStar to enable people to list their vehicles in a couple of clicks. We have all the data from OnStar, so the listing process is even easier than what it would be. And then for renters to be able to rent the vehicle, and then when their time comes to be able to get into the vehicle, they can use our mobile app, they can use text messaging, they can use our website to just click the button that says unlock the car, and then through the integration of our app with OnStar, magically, 15 seconds later, the car unlocks. And we love this idea of working with car manufacturers to really enable cars to do things that they couldn't do before because of that software integration. And we are, I think, in the very beginning of that kind of integration of software into vehicles.
Great, thank you very much. And let me end with a question to Howard. We talked about the logic of this business and the idea that as the density and the number of owners and renters on the system increases, we will have more than 100 million Americans who are within less than 10 minutes of a relay rides car. So once that happens, Howard, what do you think will be the structure of the car rental industry in the United States?
As evidenced with General Motors being excited to work with relay rides, I think we will see a variety of auto manufacturers working directly to be part of the network. What we'll have is, and the reason why this business I think has so much potential to be worth a lot of money was Andre describing disrupting the car ownership model. Currently, if you need a car and you don't own one, you have to go to a rental agency, which is far away. You may even have to get somebody to drive you there. When we hit the goal of having a car within 10 minutes of where you live, you don't need to own your own car anymore. And this will be, relay rides will be the platform which makes it possible for you to use relay rides as a car ownership alternative. As such, the large auto manufacturers will, as GM has, be applying their technology to the vehicles to make sure that they are doing the best job to satisfy these consumers. As an example, if you want to rent a Chevy pickup truck and there's one that's close to you, then relay rides is the right thing to use. If you want to rent a Audi sports car, they will, as their technology advances, be putting the ability for people on relay rides to consumers on relay rides to use that car as well. And no longer will it be one car, one owner, and will you be sort of have to make the decision what type of car you want to own for the next 5 years. Instead, you will have a mix of different vehicles, a pickup truck when you have some moving to do, a sports car when you want to take your girlfriend on a weekend drive, or a SUV when you want to go skiing for the weekend. So rather than being tied to one vehicle, you'll have the opportunity to be tied to as many vehicles as are on the system near your home that are convenient for you. And I think it may result in more unique automobiles in the future, as instead of a large manufacturer competing on just having another four-door sedan that may not be all that differentiated, we may see even more differentiated vehicles moving forward as they're vying for the consumers who want to have unique vehicles.
So when Andre and Howard described the business model, we focused on the value creation model, and we talked a bit about the logic of the business. Quite a number of questions have focused really on the profit model, starting from the revenue model. So how does Relay Ride, Andre, kind of create revenue?
Yes, I saw the questions. They're great questions. So let me answer in a couple of minutes, and because you can talk about that for hours. So from a revenue standpoint, we are a transactional marketplace. So we charge the owners and the renters a fee. The owners are charged 25% for every rental they make. So if you make a rental of $100, which is the average transaction size, your net earnings as an owner is $75, and we keep $25. And then we charge the renters a 10% fee on top of that. So we've got roughly, a 35% take rate from every transaction. And then we have the renters pay for the level of insurance and protection that they would like. And we have 3 levels of insurance and protection. We call them premium, basic, and decline. So based on your risk profile or based on whatever coverage that you might have from your car policy or from your credit card, you might choose to select either premium or basic or decline coverage. So that's roughly the revenue model. So expect between a 35 and a 40% take rate on every transaction that's taking place through the marketplace. And that's pretty much the type of take rates. That's a little bit higher than the take rates that you'd see in traditional marketplace models. eBay, for example, where I spent 10 years, between eBay and PayPal charges 15% of transactions. Amazon Marketplace charges 15% of transactions. Airbnb charges roughly 15% of transactions. The reasons why we need to charge more, we get to that 35%, is because of the insurance aspect. That is an important cost element. We provide owners and renters with liability coverage as well as physical damage coverage. And that cost is an incremental cost that doesn't affect, for example, an e-commerce marketplace. And that's why our revenue take rate is higher than traditional marketplaces at 35%. Now, going deeper into the profit model, the key costs for us, the key variable costs for us are insurance, again, and customer service. We are in the business of connecting people around car rental, and a lot of things can require some support from a customer service agent, whether it's changing their reservation or having some issue with their trip or having some need for immediate support in case there's an accident. So this is not a pure software model where customer service is a very tiny part of the equation. Our model is a marketplace model, so we have an important element to consider, which is the need for our community to get support. So we offer phone support, we offer email support, and that's the second big part of our variable costs. And then the traditional fixed costs are the ones that you'd expect, which is building technology, hiring people, spending money on marketing, spending money on the staff, the salaries, the benefits. Those are what you'd expect in any company. I won't spend too much time talking about those because those are pretty much familiar with any other technology or any kind of business.
A number of people's questions have focused on two related issues. One is, have we seen these types of models, sharing economy models, work in other areas? And people have asked about what I call the issue of trust. So, of course, we've seen sharing economy models in many, many different applications. Some of them include toys, apparel, DVDs, anything you can think of, people are beginning to share. And all of this raises the question of how do you trust the counterparty? In the case of renting space, as in Airbnb, how does the person who rents out their apartment, how can they trust the person on the other side? In the case of relay rides, of course, how can the person who owns the car trust the person on the other side? What happens when there's an accident? How do we manage this network of trust? And that's one of the most interesting aspects of these models. And what I'm going to do is ask Howard to kind of describe to us how trust works in those sharing economy models.
So the most important piece of trust for sharing economy models is reputation. And the more data that you have on both parties, whether they're on time, whether they keep the car clean, whether they do what they say that they're going to do, the trust that we get is predominantly built by reputation over time. But one of the great things about having a reputation model is the stronger it gets, the harder it is for competitors to come into the model and compete with it. Relay Rides actually has a better advantage over most starting out, which is we screen the drivers of the cars very carefully to understand their driving history and their driving experience, so that at the very least we are bringing in drivers who we have a good sense that they're trustworthy in their history and experience. And there's a lot of data out there to make this possible. And then as we go over time, your reputation ratings will be the thing that drives the most value and helps to block out competitors in the business. If you look at a company like eBay, where I've been an active seller on eBay for 10 years, my reputation is extremely valuable to me. I will make sure that every transaction that I perform, I get rated as positive, because I can sell for higher prices and faster if my reputation is better, and I do a good job with customer service. Similarly, in any of these models, whether it's Airbnb or Relay Rides or eBay, on both sides of the equation, if you want to continue to have access to that marketplace, you have to do a great job and build your reputation in each transaction that you do.
May I add just one additional perspective, which is that you wouldn't create a marketplace business if you did not believe that people were basically good. And the reality is, the vast majority of people are great people. And the great news is the emergence of all these marketplace models and the sharing economy models is a statistical proof of that. Because if people were not 99.9% good, those models would fall apart very quickly. And of course, the granddaddy of all of those is eBay. So you've got to start with a belief that actually, as an entrepreneur, do you believe that people are basically good? And if you don't get into the marketplace model, because you're going to find every setback or every issue to be really insurmountable. So there's always bad things can happen, of course. So you don't want to be naive about thinking that everything's going to work out really perfectly every time. And the job of a marketplace manager, which is how we view ourselves at Relay Rides, is to make sure that those things that do happen can happen the least frequently possible, and that they're really well taken care of when they do happen. And so the way we do that is by screening these drivers, as Howard was talking about, by using social integration so that people can feel that trust. We call it trust and safety. Trust is the visible component that makes you feel good about, transacting with somebody, and safety is the hardcore component behind the scenes, using metrics, using screening, using technology to weed out the bad people.
Before we continue, I just want to quickly thank everybody for submitting all their questions. We've received a lot of questions, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to answer them all. But again, we want to thank you for submitting your questions.
Okay, so we have a number of questions that focus on metrics and unit economics, where in the case of Relay Rides, one can think of unit economics as looking at either one renter or one owner and thinking about the customer acquisition cost versus the lifetime value of that customer, which is the net present value of all of the money that we can get from that customer after subtracting variable costs over the time that they're staying with us. So what I'll do is aggregate a couple of these questions and have one question for Andre and a related question for Howard. And Andre, what kind of metrics do you track to kind of identify unit economics? And for Howard, when you evaluate a business model, which metrics do you look at, and at what stage should people have those metrics available for you?
Great questions. We're one of the very important capabilities that you need to build when you're managing a marketplace. You've got to really be good at metrics. Very good. And it's one of the first people that I hired when I joined the company a couple of years ago is a BI guy, business intelligence or analytics person. And we look at tons of metrics. So let me summarize, because we can talk about this forever, but we look at a lot of supply metrics and demand metrics, and then transaction metrics. So on the supply side, we look at everything from traffic to conversion of new owners, then owners, first owners, getting actual first rental requests, then fulfilling these requests. We look at their transaction value, how much they're, to your point about lifetime value, we look at lifetime value for every owner. So how much money have they generated, how much gross margin have they generated. On the renter side, we do the same thing. We look at traffic, we look at sign-ups. On the renter side, we look at conversion from those sign-ups into rental requests, and then into completed rentals, then repeat rentals. The goal is really to build that LTV model so that we can understand what's the value of a sign-up, what's the value of a listing, and then we can orient our marketing strategy and our spend and optimize our marketing strategy and our spend in a way that we never spend more than what the actual lifetime value of a renter is or of an owner could be. So we look at all of that from a very metrics-oriented way. We also then look at a lot of trust and safety metrics. I was talking about trust and safety earlier. So what percentage of transactions result into a claim? What's the nature of these claims? How can we anticipate by building and enhancing our risk management models? How can we anticipate with a little data, anticipate this could be a high-risk customer and be able to put in some more safeguards in place before we let that customer either list their car or rent their car. So we do a lot of metrics, a lot of modeling on the risk management model of the business. And then finally, we look at a lot of metrics regarding customer satisfaction, because we believe things like NPS could be great predictors of repeat usage and of, increased value of every customer. So those are the three large buckets of metrics that we look into.
And some of the metrics that Andre shared in his presentation today, such as the average owner making a couple $100s a month and some owners making over $1,000 a month, some other data he didn't share, we have some cars that have been rented hundreds of times, individual cars. And of those rentals, some of them are the same renters renting them over and over and over again, once or twice a week for 6 months. And so what we do in a young company is we build a model that we think will work out. And, of course, when you start, everything isn't always working perfectly, but you drive towards a model and you measure things and you say, what is it about that owner that's causing him to make $1,500 where somebody else is only making $200? And we evaluate it, and then we try and make other owners understand and do the same things that owner is doing. Likewise, why are some renters, what are the profiles, the demographics, the geographics, the use cases? In a young company like this, we have a model for how it works, and we are driving. Some of the metrics are already well within the parameters we need, and we continue to improve them. And others, when we move into a new city and we are getting cars in North Dakota, but we don't have a lot of renters there, we know that there's some costs that are necessary upfront to do it. But in the end, all the answers aren't there in any company ever. And they're always working to use the metrics, trying things to get data to improve over time, and that is the stage that Relay Rides is in right now, and we are quite pleased with the progress that we are making. Long sales cycles, similarly, cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to figure out if your customers are going to buy from you. And meanwhile, before you're profitable, you're burning a lot of money to get there. So it's not a great business model. And finally, business models, in the end, you're building a business to make a lot of money. And if your goal is to sell the company or go public, you need to consider whether the market values your business model or not. And a good example is a high-margin technology business with a lot of customers that are cheap to acquire can be worth a lot of money. But a service provider model where you're doing consulting work is not valued a lot by the market, so it's not as attractive a business. On the interesting side, most of these are just the counterpart of what I said and what aren't interesting. So capital efficient means you can figure out if the business is going to have a strong business model or not without having to spend too much money to figure that out. Something that is quick. We all only have so much time in our lives. We don't want to spend 5 or 10 years to figure out if a business model is valuable or not. We'd like to do it in 2 or 3 or 4 years. Complexity is bad, so simple is good. If you can easily understand the business model and describe it to someone, you have a great advantage over complexity in the model. Being able to decide on your business model and do things independently without having to worry about what other companies are doing or that they are helping you out in your process.
Our focus today is going to be on business models, and what I'm going to do is start by introducing the topic in a few minutes, and then return it over to Howard and Andre, who are two great business model innovators who can tell us about some of the developments in the area. So just as we have a blueprint for a building that helps us structure and plan the construction effort, the business model is a structured model that describes how a venture will create and deliver value to its customers and how it will extract some of that value for itself. In a construction project, we try to stick to the plan with minor corrections along the way. In contrast, in new venture development, we keep iterating and experimenting with our business model, so we really have a highly dynamic blueprint. The business model gives us some structure and discipline to guide us through this dynamic process so that the venture will not come unglued. When we think about structuring a business model, I believe that the most important rule, really, it's the rule for structuring anything, is that you need to break what you're looking at to no more explanation that shows why the venture is going to work. How can we actually create value and extract some of it for ourselves? And typically, we want to structure it as a flywheel that shows how the venture grows and becomes increasingly more profitable. And what I'm going to do next is kind of turn to Howard. And Howard, can you please tell us how you evaluate a business model as a venture capitalist?
Sure. Every day I see 5 or 6 different presentations of entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses. And there are things that I think are not interesting, and there's things that I think that are interesting in the business model. So first I'd like to talk about the things that are not interesting. The venture investor's job is, in the end, to make money as a result of the business that they invest in being worth a lot of money. So one of the things that is not interesting to me in a business model is a company that's simply going to take a lot of money to figure out if they are viable, profitable, and able to grow. And that's simply, if it takes a lot of money and you only make a certain amount, it's not a great investment. But if it takes a small amount of money, then it can be a great investment. Another thing that's not interesting to me is many participants in the business model. That means a company has to rely on all sorts of outside vendors.
More than 3 components. And of course, under each of the components, you may have some substructure. But you really need to start with no more than 3. If you have more than 3 components, you don't have a structure, you have a mess, and you need to rethink what you're doing. In the case of business models, let's see what are the 3 components that we're talking about. The first component is the 3 components are the value creation model, the profit model, and the logic of the business. And the first component is the value creation model, which describes how the venture creates and delivers value to its customers. And that includes the product, the target customers, the value proposition, where the venture is positioned within the value chain, and distribution, since the product typically needs to be delivered as well. Once we have created some value, we can extract some of it for the venture itself, and that's described by the profit model that starts from a revenue model that shows how we extract revenue given the value that we've created, and what is the cost structure of the venture, where we then focus on the drivers of profitability for the venture. The third component of a business model is what I call the logic of the business. The logic of the business is a structured
vendors or partners or companies or technology integrators. Complexity is a horrible piece to a business model. There are some companies who have figured out over time how a very complex business model can work for them, but in general, it's something that's very concerning. If you think about Google, it actually has a very, very simple business model, which is making money off of clicks for advertising. All the other things they do, I think, are subparts of their business model, but that's when it gets too complex, it gets too risky. Similarly, a business model that has many participants in the market is not a great idea because it means it's crowded and you have to fight and you have to differentiate yourself in a very complicated market with many players, which drives up your costs of customer acquisition and penetrating the market. Business models that require a lot of integration with legacy systems tend to be very slow. A potential customer may want to purchase the product, but it just takes a lot of time and money to make the decision to do it and actually implement it. So it's something that slows down the business and is harmful to a business model. Businesses that are hit-driven are not interesting. Good example are gaming companies. You can have some very exciting games, but if your next one is not a hit, your business can drop in value and your business model can dry up and go away as your customers go to another competitor.